In my opinion, the Sony A7CR is the most underrated camera release of 2023 and continues to be extremely underrated in 2024. I feel like it's never brought up enough whenever people are talking about alternatives to the Leica Q3 or even the Sony A7C II. So why is that when the A7CR and the A7C II are nearly identical in pretty much every single way except for the sensor? Now, I've noticed that a lot of people tend to gravitate toward the A7C II over the A7CR, and I think a lot of that could be because of the price. But I also think it's because a lot of people prefer to have a hybrid camera that excels in both photo and video. Rather than have a camera that has a 61 megapixel sensor because they don't need a camera with a super high resolution like the A7CR, or they're worried about the noise that comes with having a sensor that is 61 megapixels. Now, most people do not need a 61 megapixel sensor in their camera, and that includes myself. I did not buy this camera just so I can take super high resolution photos, but I bought it because of the added versatility of having that high resolution sensor. Now, what I mean by that, I'll get to in a second, but you don't need 61 megapixels to create large, beautiful prints when a 24 megapixel sensor camera is more than capable of doing that. And I think a lot of people don't realize that you don't have to shoot at 61 megapixels all of the time with the A7CR. There's a variety of different RAW file types that you can shoot in that allow you to shoot at 61 or 26 or even 15 megapixels. In fact, recently I found out I was accidentally shooting in the medium lossless compressed RAW format, which is shooting only 26 megapixel photos. So this whole time I thought I was shooting 61 megapixel photos. I was actually only shooting 26. And when I went through my RAW files on my hard drive, I realized I had accidentally been doing this for weeks and I just never noticed. Which I think goes to show that you don't need all of that resolution all of the time. Now, that's not the only positive of the 61 megapixel sensor. If you are using this camera in APS-C mode for photography, that means you're also getting 26 megapixels, which is the exact same as the A6700, the FX30, and even the ZV-E10 Mark II. So if you already own one of those cameras and you decide to upgrade, you don't have to worry about selling all of your old lenses, because you can still use those lenses on this camera and not have to worry about compromising on the resolution. So Viltrox recently sent me their new 35mm 1.7. It's actually what inspired me to make this video because I really enjoyed using it, and it is an APS-C lens, and I've been using it on the Sony A7CR. But if I was using this lens on the original Sony A7C, I would only be getting about 10 megapixels. And while the photos would still certainly be usable, it really wouldn't leave much room for cropping in post, and it wouldn't really feel like you're getting the most out of what your camera is capable of when the average person's smartphone can take higher resolution photos than 10 megapixels. So if we take a look at these photos I shot on the Sony A7CR with the Viltrox 35mm 1.7, you'll see that the photos still look incredible and just as good as if you were shooting on the Sony A6700. Cropped in, the photos look super sharp, and I can't even think of a reason that I would need 61 megapixels for this photo. Now keep in mind, when you are using the APS-C mode, you are getting about a 1.5 times crop. So this 35mm Viltrox lens is actually equal to about a 50mm full frame, about 52mm if we want to be specific. So I think it goes to show, if you own the A7CR or you're even considering it, you shouldn't just limit yourself to full frame lenses because there are so many amazing other options out there. The only real downside when you're shooting in the APS-C mode on this camera is that it also crops in on the viewfinder, so you aren't getting the full resolution. And the A7CR already does not have the best resolution viewfinder out there, but you can still see things pretty clearly, and obviously it does not impact the actual resolution of the image. I think it's a fairly small price to pay when it comes down to delivering photos to a client and not having to worry about them being concerned about the resolution or the overall image quality. You have an incredibly high resolution full frame camera, and you basically have a built-in Sony A6700 in terms of the photo taking capability. Now, of course, the A6700 does still have better video features, such as 120 frames per second when you're shooting in 4K, but I personally can't think of a time I've ever actually needed to shoot in 120 frames in 4K. It's nice to have, but I definitely don't think it's needed. The only other thing you have to factor in is the price point of this camera, which is $3,000. But this camera has been out for over a year at this point, and there's been multiple times now that I have seen this camera on sale for $2,500, which makes it only about $200 more than the Sony A7C II, and at that point, I think buying the A7CR would be a no-brainer. And of course, your other option is to buy the Sony A7R5 if you are considering that, but it is a little bit more expensive, but you do have a lot of upgrades like the better screen, the better viewfinder, and slightly better ergonomics if you don't care about the compact size of the A7C cameras. And the last thing that I will touch on that I mentioned earlier in this video is the 61 megapixel sensor and people being concerned about the noise. I've got a lot of comments on my videos, and I've seen them across the internet, of people being worried about the photos and the noise that comes from having a super high resolution sensor. Realistically, I've noticed almost no difference coming from my original Sony A7C in terms of noise, even in higher ISOs, maybe just a slight increase, but as long as you're not pixel peeping, then you're definitely not going to notice, especially when you export and look at the edited JPEGs. So in my opinion, the difference in terms of noise at higher ISOs, including the dynamic range at higher ISOs as well with the 61 megapixel sensor, it's almost completely negligible, and you're probably not going to notice as long as you're not looking for it. And even if you were looking for it, you still probably wouldn't be able to notice, but it's not like you're taking photos side by side with two different cameras, so the photo you get is the photo you get, and I don't think a little bit of noise in the photo even really matters. So if you found this video because you are considering buying this camera and you want to learn more about it, you can go over to my channel. I have plenty of videos on this camera and plenty of photo examples where you can learn more and see why I think this camera is so underrated and why I love it so much. So thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to help support the channel. And I hope I could inspire you guys to get out and take more photos. Go out and shoot.